Welcome along. I'm Tim. I'm an enterprise agile coach. I help organizations to work effectively to deliver and maximize their customer value. With me today is Andy Hiles, my co-host, and we're joined by Fraser. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so for those who don't know who I am, I'm a professional Scrum trainer. I've got a new tooth. I'm struggling. I'm a professional Scrum trainer, Scrum.org, a professional Kanban trainer, Pro Kanban, author of the amazing book, which is over there. But if you're listening, you can't see it. It's the Applying Scrum and Kanban book to be found on all good bookshops, rhyming with Amazon. So that's a little introduction from me.
Brilliant. And we're joined today by Fraser. Fraser's a CFO. I had the pleasure of working with Fraser at a startup for a long time, and he's joined us today to dive a little deeper into the role of CFO and how we overlap things. Fraser, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. It's great to catch up with my long-lost twin brothers. I think the Proclaimers have now got a threesome in competition with them, but that's all right. How are you guys doing? Everything going well?
Yep, really well.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. I'm looking forward to this immensely.
Yeah, no, great. And what I was hoping you could do for us, Fraser, is just tell us a little bit about your experience. Just so, because I know you've got the chops, but let's help the audience to understand that you know what you're talking about.
Well, I started life thinking that school was quite easy, and then didn't study particularly hard, and only just managed to scrape into uni. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but at the time, the more geographically remote parts of the UK, Wales, north of England, Scotland, and Cornwall, Devon, were all suffering from an economic downturn. So I decided to do accountancy because I figured that there was always a job for accountants, and I would defer figuring out what I wanted to really do in my life until I grew up. So here I am 58 years later, still trying to figure out what I want to do, and finding the elusive growing up process. But I did accountancy and finance at uni. I went out into the profession, working with Arthur Andersen. I set myself the career goal of becoming a finance director by the age of 30. I managed to achieve that with one day to spare. Became the finance director of Stanley Tools in the UK, the manufacturers and marketers of the obligatory Stanley knife, and we made 3 million knife blades a week in Sheffield, which just completely threw me as to how violent the UK had actually become. But after that, I did a few years with a global strategy consultancy called McKinsey, then back out into industry, and cut a long story short, had a great experience working with Newton, a technology startup where we first crossed paths. And I think we'll get into the detail of that, I'm sure. But when I joined, it wasn't entirely sure what the outcome was going to be. And I think working with a great team, we managed to pull the iron out the fire there. And here we are, all looking hale and hearty a few years later. So in summary, a bit of a random walk focused around accountancy, but more latterly CFO, which is, as we'll possibly come on to talk about, I consider it to be a wee bit more than just being the extrovert accountant who's looking at somebody else's shoes as opposed to looking at their own.
I'm LinkedIn stalking you. Something I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, which I thought was awesome, actually, I wanted to kind of ask you about, which is I think it was 1995 to 97. Might be wrong on those dates. I'd have to go back and check, but it was volunteering cooking breakfast for the homeless.
Yeah, that came about. I'm always eager to remind myself of relatively modest beginnings. My dad was the youngest of 7 boys in a 2-room apartment in the East End of Glasgow. Everybody worked hard. The harder they worked, the more successful they became. So Dad had a great career, as did all of his brothers. But at the time, I was finance director at Stanley, and there was a lad who drank down my local pub who was a social worker and came in one Friday night and said, I'm quite possibly going to be murdered tomorrow, which somewhat got my attention as to how he'd figured out I was about to murder him. But it turned out there were 2 of us looking to murder him. And Richard, unfortunately, one of his clients suffered from schizophrenia, had come off his medication, and had announced to the general public that he was going to murder Richard that following morning at a project that the church in actually it was the cathedral in Sheffield ran for homeless people. So I offered to go along and ride shotgun just to make sure that somebody literally had his back. I then found that I enjoyed it. I found it very fulfilling. And also, I think, without wishing to sound big-headed, many of the clients thought it was great that somebody who had a a big executive car that would be parked outside was taking the time to come and spend time with them. So I have to admit, my tactic of making the world's worst cup of tea didn't unfortunately preclude me from being invited back. And I did that for 2.5, 3 years when I was up in Sheffield. Unfortunately, I had to give it up when I moved back south for McKinsey. But I think it's often for all of us, even when we're having our highs and especially when we're having our lows, it's important, I think, to remember that there's other folks out there that don't have their troubles to seek. And maybe despite the fact that you're not able to see the wood for the trees, if you can see that you're able to help somebody in any small way, then that's a good thing. Keeps you grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was just something that stuck out on your background. I was just like, yeah, it's just awesome. So I look for kind of those kind of stories in people. That it's we're going to get on to kind of talk about CFO and kind of agility, but it's also digging into the human side, like what makes people tick and what makes you. So like bringing that forward into what you do now is there must be something in that, not necessarily making the world's worst cup of tea, or maybe you do. Maybe that's how you.
Trust me, I do. It's taken years of practice to do it, so that I'm never asked to do it again. But I think, let's dive in a wee bit. I think through my career, I live in deepest, darkest Hampshire, and I spent much of Monday to Friday working away, as was the case when Tim and I worked together. So when we moved down here, my wife was pregnant with our daughter, Maisie, and I've spent a lot of time away, and only in recent times with pandemic have I actually been here a lot more and been able to influence things, hopefully in a positive way in her upbringing. But my goal in life has always been that when I properly kick the bucket, folks will come along to any funeral or service and tell Maisie that was a good bloke. And I think being a good person is quite a good North Star to have. And my role, being a good person, encompasses a lot of different things. It's making sure that you're close to being the first in the office to welcome folks as they come in, perhaps to lead by example in terms of how hard you're working, but also trying to do so with a smile on your face. I am utterly merciless in taking the mickey out of people, but I expect them to be utterly merciless in giving it back. I take a great interest in maybe what's going on outside of work in somebody's life, because there can be things that experiences that I've had that might be relevant. I look to try and make that offer. When Tim and I worked together, I was a smoker, so those that smoked probably got to see a lot more of me and hear a lot more about me than maybe some others. But I tried to sort of put myself out there so that if there was something that I could help with, I would try and help. But also gave me the credibility to show that I was, despite having a C in my job title, I was a human. I could empathise. I could understand what motivated person A as opposed to what motivated person B. And I think the role of a CFO or a CFO plus is to bring the organization together so that it actually does begin to implement the strategy that the CEO has formulated. It's the role of I think I've taken the role of trying to take a big hairy arse strategy and break it down into bite-sized chunks that people can digest and buy into, of taking the role of trying to explain why we're going in that direction, and listening to people saying, well, why aren't we going in that direction? And then saying the important thing is that we're all going in the same direction. Whether it's the right direction is open to debate, but we're all going in the one direction. Because if you go in the wrong direction, then you're by yourself, and that ain't going to work. And I think, particularly at Ubiquitous, there were folks, ex-military folks in key roles. The CEO was had been a tank commander before going off and doing a bunch of other things very successfully. But he explained to me in my early days there that his role was to decide which hill we were going to take. My role was to ensure that he didn't drive the troops off the cliff before they got to the top of the hill. So, not being military minded, I thought, Christ, what have I got myself into here? But I thought that would repeat itself frequently throughout my time at Ubiquitous. But after a few months, I said to the CEO, would you mind if my role was also to debate with you whether that was the right hill? Because on occasions, people are human, the wrong hill is being taken. So he was really good in opening up to that and allowing me to be part of that debate. I'm not a great strategist, I wouldn't ever claim to be, but where I'm good, I think, is getting consensus in the folks around as to why we're doing it. And if we have to pivot on a sixpence because outside conditions demand that, then we pivot on a sixpence and folks are prepared to accept that leadership. So that's in what's the term is a sort of history of Fraser, random walk career, try and be a good human being, try to, in a holistic context, not just in a work context, have a laugh while you're doing it and make a few quid along the way, and hopefully allow other people to do the same.
Yeah, and I've been kind of digesting the tension of strategy versus, I guess, control. It's probably the words that are kind of spinning around my brain. Around, I was thinking, and the other thing I was thinking about is how many times I've ever interacted with a CFO at an organization, and I don't think I can count. Maybe one hand.
Yeah, well, at Ubiquitous, you didn't get the choice really, because if I hadn't stumbled upon you, then I was going to come and actively find you. It was a sizable enough organisation. I can't remember how many employees we had across the globe, but certainly it was into the hundreds. And I wanted to know everybody by first name and have had a conversation, and probably get out for a few beers with, or shown myself to be an avid Scotch consumer at various company events.
What do you think, I'm sorry, yeah. What do you think that added to the picture of the organisation? Away from the, again, organisations where, and this was the thing I was discussing with Tim around when we ignoring. I'm going to ignore agile for a minute, right? Because we're just talking about getting work done. It kind of from that team person coming in, trying to deliver to a strategy set by somebody they might also have not met, or seen a picture of in an internal blog, right? Versus the kind of approach you're bringing, I guess, something slightly different. What's the...
I've every day in my life, I've sought to learn something new. And one of the most important lessons from a career perspective that I learned was at Stanley Tools. I was part of a small group of executives who were trying to, just create a completely different way of doing things. Historically, it was command and control. You checked in, you clocked out, and you didn't make any decisions yourself. You were told what to do, how to do it. You were told how long it should take. You were chastised if it took any longer. You were chastised by your colleagues if it took any shorter, because they tried to elongate the time that it took so that they could have a leisurely life, blah, 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 blah. And this initiative, I worked with a manufacturing cell supervisor called Ron, And he made long tapes, tapes that were used by architects to ensure that buildings were properly measured. Surveyors used them as well at that time. And Ron had worked with the company from the age of 16, and he was going to retire the following year at the age of 65. A one company person had worked really hard to get to supervisory role. And I said, Ron, this product is the worst performing product that we have. We had too many variants of it. We had too many different packaging formats. It was making a huge loss with quite a lot of capital employed. And I said, how would you change this and make it more profitable? And Ron said, son, I've been working here for almost 48 years at the time. He said, I check my brain in at the gatehouse on the way in and I pick it up again on the way back out. Nobody's ever asked me anything. And I said, okay, so here's your chance to really go out with a bang. And by letting Ron have the space to make his own decisions for the sale, he turned in the space of 6 months the worst performing product, albeit it was niche and it was never going to be huge, but financially it was on the path to becoming one of the best performing products. So the lesson there is have the force of personality to convince someone to take the risks, back them up when they get it wrong, give them a good kicking if they make the same mistake twice over and haven't learned that. But we all only learn by taking that initial risk to get off our knees and start walking. And there's maybe a few mishaps on the way, but the best decision making is by the team. Now that conflicts with the command and control mentality. So how do you make that work? Well, you can't have everybody being the manager. You can't have everybody being the general or the chief. You need braves. You need soldiers. You need folks that are going to do the hard yards. So convincing them that the way that you were implementing things had been thought through, taking on board input that they might have, being a benevolent despot, have your own idea about what the answer is, but be prepared to be influenced by folks who actually know what they're talking about, and then force the organization to make a decision. Don't defer until the next meeting and the next meeting. We need action. That's what I believe is the best policy in it. For a good CFO, I think oftentimes being that bridge, both from the CEO to the wider management team, but also being someone that can be seen to be approachable by the rest of the organization, just to get that buy-in. Eventually, I would like to think that folks took some reassurance that I'd been involved in making the decision, and even though it looked like the wrong decision, and often was, they were prepared to give it a go. So,
yeah.
Tim, am I talking bollocks, or does any of that ring any bells?
No, absolutely. I mean, I was going to ask you the question about, how would you describe your role and its accountabilities? And I think we could unpick a lot of that from what you've said. But I just wondered if there was like a one or two sentence kind of answer to that made sense in terms of the role and its accountabilities as a CFO. Have you put any thought into what that might look like?
I think it will vary by situation. But the recurring theme, I guess, is to ensure that an extreme perspective has a counterbalance. So if somebody is being aggressively optimistic, then just pulling them back a little bit and saying, look, we need to keep a little bit of resource up our sleeves in case X, Y, or Z happens. If somebody's being overly pessimistic, you sort of flip to the other view and say, for God's sake, grow with it. We need to get out there and really push hard on this. This looks like a good initiative. At UP, I don't know if I ever told you this story, Tim, but there was we developed world-leading technology for small cells. Think of them as mini cell towers that projected out from a home or an office, rather than having a big tower that couldn't get into an urban canyon. So it provided cellular coverage which, given the takeoff and the use of data, has become particularly relevant. And we were world leading. There was much that had been done that was truly fantastic. We had an excellent team, but we, as with all startups, it was a fairly rocky journey on occasions. And the Christmas of 2011, one of the board members wanted to just get shot of the business, wanted to sell the business, do a fire sale. He said, we'll be lucky to get $10 million for it. And as a team, we all kind of worked together and managed to sell the business to Cisco a relatively short time later for close on $310 million. But the accountability there that I felt was to the team. I wanted to make sure that the team was well looked after, but I also felt accountable to shareholders. I felt accountable to the company itself, and that this technology was really groundbreaking. And if it had all gone south without ever having the opportunity to shine, I really thought it would have been a great waste. So the way that I confirmed those accountabilities was there was still some wavering from the investors, and I put in £250,000 of my own money to help finance the business, and the fact that was and remains a considerable amount of money for Park Ventures, I think that allowed everybody to coalesce behind it, and we managed to live to fight another day. So I think the CFO is and should be and should feel accountable to everybody. If that's not evading your question, I think the minute a CFO doesn't feel accountable, then things are going haywire, because of all the people in the organisation that need to hold people to account and be held accountable. The CFO, other than CEO, is the most evident.
No, I think it's a great answer, and I think you're probably being a little bit more kind of a wallflower, which I don't think you've probably been accused of before. I think your strength of will in the days at UB really did shine through, which was why I'm pleased that we could get some of your time to talk today, because taking a small startup through a bunch of those rounds of ensuring we had funding in place, ensuring we had the right strategy, communicating that well, which you did an amazing job of, but ultimately taking us to an exit which ticked everyone's boxes, right? Everybody won from that kind of exit that we had. And I think in terms of accountability as a CFO, I think you really nailed it there. I don't want to kind of fluff your ego. You don't need that from me, but I think it was important.
I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I think if anyone that I know from those times views that and listens to the podcast, the point I want to reinforce is that I inherited a phenomenally good team. They were somewhat undermotivated when I got there for a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into. I inherited a really good close team. My direct reports were phenomenally good. And I adopted the Bill Shankly approach of trying to get agreement with them as to what the game plan was. But as long as they were on the field and doing what we'd agreed, I was happy. And the team needs to get most of the credit. In that respect, I particularly towards the end of the sale process, I was more process managing rather than doing. I think there were a number of people that went above and beyond the call. I think the founders did a great job, very credible. I think Chris, the CEO, did a superb job. He did most of the thinking as to how best to get the right sale process. One thing that I did was, probably force certain decisions to happen, because we were that Christmas on the point of running out of money, and the amount of money that we raised wasn't going to see us through for the rest of the time. So the thing that I encouraged the board to do was set the process off. I wanted to do it straight away, but listened to wiser counsel who said, wait till after Christmas. We'll do it in January, and then we'll get everybody involved. So we took a bit of a high risk approach. It worked, but I'm not being falsely wallflowery here. I did have a great team working with me, and the wider team at UB was fantastic as well.
So, I mean, I didn't hear any of that. And actually, as somebody who doesn't know you and somebody who wasn't there, I wasn't there, man. I heard a lot of, I don't know whether it's uniqueness in culture and approach, and the kind of how engaging or how to engage people, in whatever your strategy is, wherever you're going. That's what I heard a lot of. I think what's been very apparent, and this is something that I think when we get into kind of like the agile space and the kind of there's a whole load of things around, and this is the bit I really don't like, and they call it the agile mindset, and I hate it. I hate that. It's just wrong, because what we're talking about is kind of like people behaviors and how you approach getting things done. Some of the other stuff I heard in what you were saying was things I try and encourage, which is the team to feel like they run the business as much as the people running the business. That's awesome. I mean, that's really cool. And I don't know how. I mean, I guess in a small startup, that's probably more encourageable than certainly in the kind of the larger spaces. If I think into kind of like the spaces where I typically end up is in large financial institutions where the CFO sits in another country altogether, right? And again, I don't know what the question is. I'm just kind of like I'm just throwing stuff out.
I hear you. I think the historic thing of walking the floor, if I go back to Stanley days, I would try to spend 3 or 4 hours a week in one of our plants, and I would walk the floor. I would get down onto the shop floor, I'd walk around, and folks would be saying, "Who's this guy wearing a suit? What's he doing here?"
I was going to say, were you wearing a suit? I bet you.
Suited and booted, and I actually had hair then. It was quite amazing when I think back. Actually, quite a lot of hair. I don't know what happened, but and you have to be able to hold your own. It was 1990s Sheffield. I remember us having a trip, an inbound trip from corporate management, and I had to, with other managers, I had to walk the shop floor to make sure that all of the pin-ups had been taken down, because what was acceptable-ish from a UK perspective was just not acceptable from a US perspective.
Yeah.
So, that walking the floor, either physically or metaphorically, on company emails, cracking a few jokes, showing yourself maybe to be open to having a laugh rather than the sort of relatively grey persona that is perceived as typical. Actually, I've not really seen many CFOs that are grey. They all have some element of uniqueness in their own way. Yeah. And I think at UB, it was probably from a work perspective, the thing that arguably was most important was ensuring that the right people attended the right meetings. And that didn't necessarily mean that I had to be in the meeting, but also ensuring that the wrong people didn't attend the meeting. So there were a few occasions where I had to come up with some spurious excuse to pull my CEO out of a meeting where engineering, product and quality were discussing the roadmap for the next, actually in certain cases for the next month, because we were doing bespoke work for a particular client that would then productize and it become part of the general offer. So we're always trying to balance the need to pay the bills from this bespoke work with what we wanted to achieve technologically. So, pulling Chris out of a meeting so that others could actually stick with the decision making and feel as though they were empowered was part of the role. So I think, allowing people a wee bit of space and supporting them when invariably something goes wrong, picking them up and saying, shit's going to happen, get on with it. It's not that bad.
Yeah.
And then going away and kicking the cat because actually it was worse. You've got to be good at poker. And, actually on occasions, I wouldn't recommend this for everybody, but being true to yourself. I'm Scottish. I come from Glasgow. It's a particular way of life up there, but we don't shirk from showing our feelings if things aren't going so well. And I try not to be overly aggressive, but haircut, accent, and Stanley knife probably means that people just completely misunderstand my intentions. And telling people you fucked up there, you need to find a different way of doing this.
Yeah.
But do it in private. Don't do it in front of everybody else. So basically be a decent human being who's prepared to stand in front of somebody and take the pain when something's gone wrong. But more importantly, and hopefully Tim will back me up on this, when we announced the acquisition by Cisco, I kind of sat down fairly quickly and pointed at my colleagues because they'd done as much, if not more, of the work than I had. So, if we all get there, if the collective gets there and it's a good outcome, that's a good thing. You've done your job well. You don't need to be. I think I was asked in a previous occasion, did I ever want to be a CEO? I don't think I'm good enough to be a CEO. I think there's a completely different set of skills and attributes that are required. But and certainly I didn't want to be the CEO at UB. The CEO that was there did a really, really good job. But I think a CFO plus is someone that could be a CEO if they wanted to, but I was happy, and I'm happy and impose my own glass ceiling somewhat. I'm happy where I am.
Yeah. And I was thinking about the walking the floors, and kind of, how else could you turn up to, an industrial factory, people probably in overalls covered in, dust and all that kind of stuff. And
I had a lady in my team who'd worked for the company for 32 years who had never been in the finance director's office.
Yeah.
He sat 5 yards from that office. And when I invited Betty in, she went green. Betty, and because I knew Betty from before, I'd worked with the organisation before, just in a different location and a different role. But when I invited her in not long after I started to get her views on life in the universe, she said, I wish you could have told me in advance. I would have got my hair done. That's how it was. When I got to the plant in Sheffield, the directors had their own canteen, they had their own toilets, they had their own parking slots. The general manager and I'll get rid of that fairly quickly, much to the discontent of not just the folks at our level, but actually the folks that thought they were going to get to that level. They aspired to having their own toilet and things like that. And I just,
You've reminded me of an organisation I worked with in London where they had the C-level had their own floor. And the floor, that floor had, it was far nicer than anything. It's that kind of wow.
But that's wrong. I think again, going back to military analogies, and other folks like Simon Sinek have made a good career out of this. Proper leaders do not eat first. There's a lot to be said for the SAS, where the leader makes sure that the team is sorted out before they look after themselves. And that way, that they will have your back when the SH1T really does hit the fan. You're all of a level. Just because you got a certain job title doesn't really entitle you to be treated differently. You got to earn that.
No, and we've got to get into the agile subject because I could talk about human behaviors and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, this is right up my alley. Agile, come on then, let's get into it. What in the world does agile mean to a CFO?
I think it initially, I might surprise you here, but the best CEOs and CFOs were probably being agile before agile became a known thing. You've got to have that ability to, starting with sort of, most obvious example of agile. You got to be able to flick things and go in the opposite direction if you find out that what you're doing is either no longer appropriate because of external shocks or is wrong because we've got it wrong. You've got to have that ability to kind of say, right, okay, stop, reconsider, move quickly in a different direction.
So do you think I'm a leading question, do you think calling it out as we're now, I'm going to air quote it, agile, do you think that's actually made it worse? Do you think it's actually stifled some of that?
I think it's allowed, the intent behind it was to learn from other people's positive experiences and set out what it was that they were doing that meant that they were hugely successful. Therefore, it was good that folks tried to do that, but agility takes a certain mindset. Not everybody is going to be a world-leading gymnast and therefore hugely agile, and therefore trying to force someone to do something that they're just incapable of doing is a recipe for disaster. So I think calling it out, it was good, but it had its downsides. And I haven't even yet got on to all of the people who suddenly said, "Hey, I'm agile." Really?
Brilliant.
You still look like Jabba the Hutt to me, mate.
And that's the thing. That's the calling it out bit. All of a sudden, we are, as an organisation, agile. Well, when weren't we? What were we doing before that made us less so? I
think all organisations need to have a sense of purpose as to why they're doing what they're doing and what they're looking to achieve along the way. All organisations need some form of command and control, because otherwise, even the best organisations can end up going off in the wrong direction. But the best organisations, call it what you will, it might be agile, it could be any of a number of more buzzwordy things. But the thing that recurs in those organisations is trust. Trust from the folks who are in the senior positions, and that they've got the right teams who have 9 times out of 10 they'll make the same decision as you would with the same set of facts. And dare I say that one of the biggest things that I think management speak hoped to change was that there was going to be increased trust going up the way as well, because what I think ought to have been the case is that the organisation could and should have seen that there was a sense of collective responsibility that the C-suite felt for the wider organisation. And I think if that trust had continued to flow both ways, and arguably in some organisations it does, you look at Microsoft now and you see an organisation that had a huge level of trust in its erstwhile C-suite, arguably wasn't hitting the ball out of the park for a wee while, but then the new CEO took over and has just basically allowed the team over there to get off and do what they do best, and given them the space to do it, and had the backbone to say, this is never going to work, I'm going to stop this now. So that's an organisation where arguably I think trust has been most evidently successful. I think in other organisations where CEOs are on a 1,000 times multiple of what the folks on the shop floor are on, that doesn't really work. I think I'll try not to smoke a spliff and start talking about the wider Malaysia of society here, but I think one of the things where the corporate world and the thrust for wealth has probably caused agility to be misused is just that, maybe financial services, internet, a bunch of startup businesses where people forget that actually the folks, you only get to good places by standing on the shoulders of giants. And if you forget that, then you're more likely to come a cropper, I think. So agility is good, but for me, it was just good management, executive decision making with a different label on it. And I don't want to underplay its importance or undermine the agile world or proponents of it. It's just actually going back to what was good management activity in the recent historic past.
Yeah, I think Andy and I would both agree that this is really just common sense, good practices that have been tried to embodied into effectively a body of knowledge, right? And I think there are elements of it which have been disingenuous. They've been misused, as you say. They're the big, heavy tools that potentially don't actually provide the benefit that people are hoping for. So I think we're all aligned on that. That good leadership, good management is good leadership and good management, regardless of what label you put around it. I was interested, you were talking about trust, and I was imagining the idea of the kind of organizational pyramid, that traditional kind of C-suite, middle management, and the people who are doing the work. And I loved your messaging around having that kind of end-to-end trust. What I was interested in was our C-suites interface outside of that. Obviously, we've got shareholders, we've got markets, we've got other people who are, I guess, gauging the value of our business and making that a quantified real thing. How do we build that trust with them? So if we're saying we need to be able to pivot on a dime, we need to be able to change when we realize that we've got an opportunity that's missed or we've made a false step, how can we reconcile their expectations of, well, how much money are you going to make in the next year, 2 years, 5 years with that flexibility?
If I'm honest, and I'm going to let you into a wee secret here, so you've got to promise not to tell anybody, but it's an absolute crapshoot. It really is. You think all of us have got our pensions. When our pension is tanking in value, the first thing we think of is, well, the folks that are investing that pension money must be numpties. They're not doing it the right way. We take a very short-term view on things rather than accepting the fact that what goes up might come down and then goes back up again. That's the nature of the markets. And I think with venture capital firms, or indeed I've had experience of public markets where the company where I was working was quoted, and I was having to talk with analysts and talk with investment managers and fund managers and a variety of folks. They're all being assessed with a very, very narrow perspective rather than them being given the time to do their job better, which is over a period of time, do you outperform the market? Because if you look at most of the stats, unless someone has been crooked and has had inside information, not many people outperform the market over a protracted period. That's how the market is. So with VCs, I think just as it's a crapshoot as to what VCs you've got invested in you, a crapshoot for them because only 1 out of 10 of their investments is going to turn into something that actually they can hang their hat on it and say that was a good investment. They want to be helpful. Sometimes they don't realize that they don't really have the experience to be helpful, or their advice, well meant and accurate as it is fucking useless because the stable door is doing this and the horse is somewhere over the top of the hill. They tend to be a lot more transactional in nature, and actually their relationship is very much more with the CEO. I would participate at board meetings. I would talk about historic performance. I would talk about how we saw things evolving in future, but most of the questions would go to the CEO. I've just thought of another role for the CFO. I remember pitching to one of our VCs, their collective investment fund, so the rest of the partners in the venture capital firm, who were trying to upset our CEO at Ubiquitous and managed to do so spectacularly easily, at which Chris sort of went off and said, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on that, and we don't need your money. And there was this kind of stunned silence, and I thought, well, I'd better say something. And I said, I have to, in my role as CFO, I have to side with Chris here that you are wrong on this and you are wrong on that. But he was wrong about us not needing your money. We really do. And they invested. So sometimes it's just, you've got to recognize that they're in a tough position. They're role playing because they want to see how you stand up to pressure. And sometimes you just have to take a wee bit of a risk and hope that the way that you respond is going to meet with a favourable outcome.
So one of the key lessons that I would say that I learned from Chris was our CEO whilst we were working together. And he once said to me, Tim, you have to remember that not all help is helpful. And you know what? That's stuck with me for life. That's such an insightful comment, because I think it's similar to this kind of view that you're saying. These venture capitalists or else will try and provide help, but sometimes they just don't understand the nature of the challenge you're facing.
The VC world was more nascent when we worked together. It wasn't in Europe a hugely well-developed ecosystem. And somebody made the point at the time, and I think it's probably changed now, but European VCs, it took a lot more due diligence for them to make an investment in a firm. And then they were loath to allow you to spend any of the money that they'd invested to achieve the end that you want to achieve, because they were worried that you were you were going to piss up a wall and it was all going to evaporate. I think now the push for finding the unicorn, I think some of the erstwhile rigor that went into European VC investing has probably been eroded because of a lot of cash flushing through our systems from a variety of sources in Russia. And I'd recommend to your listeners read Putin's People by Catherine Belton, an ST journalist. Boy, did that take some of the rose-tinted specs off the situation in London with regards to where a lot of the money comes from. But I think you're right that Chris would come out with a few little pearls of wisdom. Thankfully, I've forgotten most of them now, but because I would never want him thinking he's got any lasting impact in my life.
Oh, no, of course not. Of course not. No, so it's great, but it sounds to me like a lot of it is it's you talked a lot about trust down the ways through the organization, but it sounds like a lot of the role that you and the CEO, as you're kind of sat side by side talking to these people who are responsible for your funding or your marketplace, it's about building trust with them as well, so that they can trust that you know what you're talking about.
It is, and not complaining, it comes with the territory, but we were the ones that were going to get fired if that bond of trust frayed at any stage. Whenever a VC starts to get involved in decision making about who's in what role below C-suite, there's something wrong. And our VCs tried to, and Chris, the founders, and I think did a good job in just saying, look, you just stay where you need to stay and let us make those decisions. If you allow someone who's well-meaning to start getting into the guts of a business, then you are screwed. Because they don't know anything about the business, they don't know anything about the people, and equally importantly, your people know nothing about them. So it's just going to be a night of the long knives. There's no positive outcome.
Yeah, and it sounds like once again, it's that trust that's a real key element of building that relationship, so that you can trust. But also, it sounds to me like a lot of it is about protecting people who are in your care. Being a good leader is about protecting the people in your care. And it sounds like there's an element of what you're talking about here is
I would say, and I'm not looking for any medals here, but I'm probably somewhat atypical in that respect, but I'm a product of upbringing. I've never actually done anything that if I was religious, that St. Peter would sort of say, oh, we need to have a wee bit of a conversation, wee man, because I've always been so terrified of being found out. So it's a lot easier just to be completely truthful all the time, because you can remember the truth a lot easier than you can remember a spin on the truth, so to speak. And I do, looking after people, in fact, when I latterly left Ubiquitous after Cisco, great company, had their way of doing things. I didn't want to work for them, and I think after my role in the negotiation with them, they didn't want me to work for them either, which is fine. So we parted company, but I still felt a really strong affinity with the team there. We had multiple both leaving dues. My leaving do will be something I'll take with me to my grave. The photograph of everybody wearing tartan tammies with red hair, particularly some of our colleagues who came from Africa and India with red hair and a tartan tammy. I still treasure those memories and the photographs. We had anniversaries, and in fact, who knows? Maybe next year, the 10-year anniversary, I'll suggest that we all get back together again, because it was a wonderful experience. I think anybody in a C-suite who doesn't recognise that trust and human interactions and looking after people isn't part of their role, probably also have gone through 5 or 6 divorces and their kids hate them because they can't assess that actually it's part of the DNA of any form of existence and any form of relationship. You have to trust and be trusted as well.
That's awesome. So CFOs are people too. Wow, who'd have thought it? I never thought we'd come up with that conclusion.
They are until you need somebody to play the hard man. And I'm breaking it down into too much one-liners here, but if somebody needed a kicking, more often than not, the threat of the kicking was enough. You didn't have to do the kicking. And people would know that if it got to that stage, that they probably merited the kicking. I think folks who take advantage of their position by, frankly, just being nasty, I don't wish them success whatsoever. Although I would say that if I look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs, not all of them would be put in the trusting, caring category. I think somebody did a study that showed that psychopaths and CEOs, 99% of what made them what they were was the exact same. And I don't knock that. It's just not one of the things that I would naturally empathise towards or would want to be considered as. As I said earlier, if and when I croak properly, I want somebody to tell my daughter that was a good bloke. That's all I want.
Well, you can't rely on me on there, mate. I'm sorry.
I know. I'm looking at Andy when I say that. I know when I'm a CFO. I know when I've lost a battle and I'm never going to get a proper return.
Yeah, I just wanted to dig into one last topic, if I may. So Tim and I talked about kind of beyond budgeting to some degree, looking at how budgetary control could be utilized better with it. It fits within this kind of whole trust thing. I think what a lot of the I've got to find a better way of introducing it. Like people in the agile community, what a lot of people talk about is budgeting at a smaller increment level, right? So rather than having annual budgets, rather than having projectary budgets, having budgets based on outcomes or budgets based on sprints, or what's your kind of view on that? How practical is that? What is is it possible? What's the shift?
This is one area where I'm very proud to put my hand up and say I am absolutely atypical. Budgeting is bollocks. It is absolute bollocks. It's always used as a way of constraining good activity. It's a way of holding people accountable when actually, if you're to properly dig in, you'd find out that they've done nothing wrong. They've just implemented, a bad command from above, or some external shock has happened, which meant that, the budget hasn't actually been appropriate. So every year when it gets to budget setting territory, if I had any, I'd be pulling my hair out because I hate it with a passion. Yeah. You get through the process where people submit inflated budgets, you look through it and you say, well, sorry, do you honestly think you're going to be able to double your headcount in a year, even if I allowed you to do it? There are only so many people with those skills. You're never going to be able to find them. So you pare it all down, and they're doing their bottom up, and you've done your top down. You're trying to force the two together, and then you get some bampot saying, I'm an agilist. I don't know if that's a word. I want you to do that 12 times a year, to which the answer is, please remove yourself in a slightly strange manner. Trusting people to do the right thing and flexing the purse strings to allow them to carry on doing more of the right thing, or constraining it when they're maybe not doing the right thing. Get across to people that, particularly even in a VC-funded environment, resources are finite. You have to show results at various points of the journey, and if you're not showing the right results, the money's going to dry up.
Yeah.
Never as a CFO, if I could give one bit of advice to end, it's thinking about going into that as a career. Don't ever presume that when things are going to implode, that a VC will actually just give you the money to get out of it. I've been in situations where it's been way too close to call, and I wouldn't wish that upon anybody. Most of which my colleagues would never hear about, because you don't want them knowing quite how close it was. So I think doing your best with initially a limited amount of resource, and then having a milestone at which you come back and say, see, look what I've done. Is that good? Do you want more of that? I need more of this. Even now, and I work in a fashion media business, and the resources are still tight, but people say, oh, Fraser, can I have budget for X? And I say, well, what is X? And I'll make a decision as to whether there's budget for it or not. I build enough flex in the overall financial plan that there's the ability to back things that you didn't know about at the start of the budgeting process. And I know who over budgets and who under budgets, and I kind of act as ringmaster there to get something that makes sense. But budgeting is bollocks. Don't do it. Avoid it like the plague. If they could come up with a serum to get rid of budgeting, I'd happily sign up to be one of the lab rats to test it.
Fraser, we're going to write this book, "Budgeting is Bollocks" by Fraser Park, and I'm just going to say that's going to be the book.
I hope we're not being inappropriate here, but I hope folks accept that I'm from Glasgow and that I don't have Tourette's disease. I've tried to constrain my language somewhat so far. So
no, but it's. I mean, again. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The notion, because I've heard this a few times. The notion of monthly budgeting, from the agile community, and I think when we spin back into the topics we've talked about over the last hour, which is lots around trust, lots around people, lots around engagement. It's that, and then looking at how you're funded. That's where you do that together with ease, right? It's kind of
where agile, I think, is good is that it gives you a regular gathering of the clans, so to speak, where all of the disparate parts of the process get together and test whether the consensus that they formed the last time remains the right consensus. And if they do that and achieve that, or realize that the consensus that they previously built was slightly wrong and they have to tweak it a little bit, that's way more important than budgeting. I wouldn't be wasting any time with micro financial plans. What you have to do is be a little bit cross-eyed. You need a dual focus. Yes, you need to know about what's happening in the immediate future, but you've got to be able to then look far in advance to see whether you're getting in broadly the right direction to where you think you need to be going. Put the budgeting to one side, build consensus, and woe betide anyone that decides that consensus is wrong and then decides to go off at a tangent. You can't have passive aggression. I think if the agile approach gets rid of spurious budgeting and passive aggression and decision making, then it's 9/10 of the way there.
Yeah. Awesome. Here, cheers. Celebrations and confetti.
So can I get your permission, Fraser, to put a couple of photographs in from your leaving do then?
You can. You may need to get permission from the folks that I have in mind that you probably also have in mind. But no, I'm very happy to do that. It still brings a smile to my face. So yes, please do. Not any of me under the bar, though.
No. I think I was under the bar with you by the point those photographs were being taken, mate.
That's why I don't want them published.
Awesome. I'll see if I can find a couple of shots to drop in because it was great fun. It was great that we could build those relationships in a small business. Well, not that small actually. Several hundred people, right? But
yeah. Well, at the end of the day, it takes two to dance, and my parting shot is that that was a successful outcome based on the quality of the people that were there. I just helped schmooze the process a little bit, but any thanks and kudos should be going to the team.
I think that's a lovely message. I think, thank you, Fraser. Hopefully you enjoyed the session today, and I've got a lot of insights and knowledge taken away from the years of experience that Fraser has, many years of experience that Fraser has. So hopefully you'll join us again in our next session, where we hope to be speaking to a neuroscientist. Please look out for when the next video drops. Thanks for your time, and please do join us again.